Hi all, game 10 today. Magnus just needed a draw today, playing white against Vishy Anand. So was this to be the final round? Playing white, he kicked off with e4, so none of this Reti or the English opening, but e4. We see a fighting Sicilian defence from Vishy Anand. Someone's commented recently as though the Sicilian's unsound. I don't think so. Nothing. I think it's further from the truth. It's a fighting opening which has been featured in many World Championship games. There's nothing wrong with the Sicilian defence. It's fighting for imbalances from move 1. And that's just what Vishy needed today. He needed to try and, probability-wise, close to impossible, one would say, to win 3 games in a row. But this was a good first move choice to see if he could try and fight with the black pieces today. After knight f3, d6, we see actually instead of the normal d4, white just needs a draw here in this game. Magnus chose actually the second most popular move on my live book, which is actually bishop b5 check. So this is quite annoying to the black player sometimes if they want to go for a very aggressive game. This quietens down the game a bit. This sort of move is attributed usually to WhiteElo, a very famous American player who actually died in a funny way, going to, not a funny way, but a tragic way, going to do a coaching session, I think some scaffolding. But he was, so he was a brilliant player in his own right. And this bishop b5 system has been hugely popularized in recent years. So WhiteElo, so we see knight d7. Another way of playing with black, I think, well, there's various ways. Actually, the most popular try is bishop d7. There's also knight c6. On my live book, actually, knight d7 that's chosen as the third most popular. So nearly 7,000 games with bishop d7, 6,800 nearly. Knight c6, 4,700. So the third most popular, and the knight going in front. And we see now d4. It looks standard now. Often black plays knight f6 though, instead of just ordinary ordinary capture on d4. Knight gf6 has been played quite a bit actually. This wasn't the game this wasn't the game continuation. C takes d4 was played here, but if we see, for example, this position, it's forcing, I guess, knight c3. That's a little finesse of it here, because if white tries anything else, d takes c5. I think there's a problem here with queen a5 check with that loose bishop. So that's why I think that's an important finesse. But Vishy ignored that little finesse. He played actually c takes d4, and this c pawn is ready to go to c4 if it isn't by force a knight occupying and blocking it. We see queen takes d4 now, and the queen's actually protecting e4. So that means now that if knight gf6, with the queen protecting e4, we could actually consider c4. In the game, a6 occurred, and instead of the bishop going back, the most popular idea here is just simply to take on d7. So bishop takes d7, the main move. Bishop takes d7 was played, and now c4. So taking advantage of the fact that the c pawn's not blocked, we've got this classic Maroczy bind. So Maroczy was a very famous player, known for actually losing lots of games on time. One tournament he nearly lost all of his games on time. The classic Maroczy bind is one of his greatest legacies. The bind is directed mainly against d5, but it's very difficult often for black to flip in b5. You would think this is the most exploitable pawn for black to go for, but it's often very difficult to achieve. So here black plays knight f6, and we see now bishop g5, and let's put on Qa5 at this point. So here e6, knight c3. So white has a pleasant looking position, not such a violent looking Sicilian defense game as you usually get in open Sicilians, but rather a more controlled kind of game. And often black's trying to do something, as well as these breaks potentially to look out for. Black's trying to make use of the dark squares generally, a dark square campaign. We see queen d3 here. What was actually black's intention? Potentially black's just maybe going to flick in h6, but queen d3, after castles, the idea really was just to play knight d4 now. That's the idea, that d4 square. So does black want to move the bishop back? If the bishop's moved back, that's okay. There's nothing which destroys black here. White can just play h3. And these bishops, though, okay, although they're preserved, black's preserved the bishop pair, it's at some time, and it does seem very pleasant, the pressure potentially on the d-file. It's okay for white. So black didn't mind actually losing the light square bishop, just rook c8 here. White, of course, doesn't have to take the bishop. He actually just played b3. And now we see queen c7. And it's here that actually Magnus took on c6. He decided to take the bishop now. And we see the queen taking back. Rook ac1, h6. The bishop drops back to e3. Knight d7, we see this kind of dark square strategy. Where is the knight heading? Which dark square? On e5 it might be subject later to f4s. We see actually first bishop d4, rook fd8, and with this square is vacated, so perhaps queen g3 is quite naturally answerable with, you'd think bishop f8, but even here it might actually be more accurate to play bishop f6. I think bishop f8, f4, and white's got some sort of prospects here with potentially f5 taking sometimes if the knight's not covering f6, but f6. This is not needed. I think just bishop f6 here is actually more to the point if queen g3 had been played. So h3 Magnus plays. If he played f3, this is also interesting. We considered this on the live stream. I think this is perhaps unnecessary weakening the dark squares, but it should be about equal anyway. But h3 looks a little bit more on the cautious side. We see now queen c7, rook fd1. So we've got a classic Maroczy bind position, and b5 is definitely kind of not on the cards at the moment, especially with the rooks protecting each other. d5 is not on the cards. e5 would always leave a gaping hole. It might be tempting to kick that bishop to some of us, but that gaping hole left behind is not very nice. So we see actually queen a5, and now queen d2, as though knight d5 might be threatened. So this idea of knight d5 would cause some damage to black. Even though queen a5 looks as though it might be helping for b5. If we played b5 here, let's just see this. Sorry, b5 there, knight d5 hits the queen, and if queen takes d2, knight takes e7, the king comes to f8, rook takes. Well, this position is quite good actually because g7 is dropping off. Maybe much better than anything else. Knight g6 is only structural damage, but if we do this, then we're actually able to snap off on g7, and that's very good for white. So okay, that threat needs to be parried. This knight d5 is a clear threat which is presented by Magnus's retreat. So knight d5, and it's parried in advance with king f8. And now we see queen b2, as though there's some concern about g7, which is going to be on the horizon. It also supports b4 as a key forcing move in some variations. The king now drops back to g8. And we see what looks like a little bit of a committal move by Magnus. a4, it does weaken a bit the b4 square, but it does try and bind further that b5 break. So trying to keep an eye on black's breaks in the position. Now the queen switches to h5. It's not so difficult. It's not so easy rather to try and trap this queen on h5. We see knight e2, as though there's a lurking potential of the knight coming to g3 or f4 potentially. We see bishop f6, and now rook c3, which looks for a moment, hold on a sec, this rook's loose, you might think. Is there something going on here? Not really. It's very difficult to exploit this actually. This has been carefully looked at by Magnus. Clearly there's nothing really going on here for black to exploit this temporary loose rook in this position, this weakness of the last move that rook c3 seems to provide. Black's not in the position to do anything too radical. Vishy just takes on d4. Clearly now not knight takes d4. because then queen takes d1, whoops. So rook takes d4 is forced. Queen e5, and it looks as though white's been tempted to play f4 here. If f4, it is creating some more weaknesses, and after queen c5 it's difficult to see what this has achieved. Magnus actually plays queen d2, more solid, simply targeting d6, which has been weakened with that bishop exchange. The bishop was helping solidify a bit, provide solidity rather, to the d6 pawn. So now we have potentially a threat of rook takes d6 in this position. The knight is protecting the rook, there's no problem taking on d6. We see the pawn protected, knight f6, and counter-attacking now on e4. Now Magnus protects this pawn with rook e3. If he had played something like f3, I think knight g3 is palatable, but f3 might be running into a little bit of a concern, or maybe not. Queen c5 looks a little bit unpleasant, like king h1, and again it's no particular big deal. There's no b5 break here because this knight's protecting the rook. We can always just, I think, snap off this pawn. So okay, we see rook e3 protecting e4 like that. White retains a small advantage. Rook d7. So are the rooks going to switch either for support d5 or just maybe b5 later and go down the c file? Well, Magnus restrains now black's queenside action entirely with b5 by playing the move a5, another perk of the queen on d2, supporting a5. So any b5 now there's en passant available to white. Queen g5, and we thought this was a bit of a nuisance for white. If f4 provocative, then queen c5, but even better no, Magnus finds a forcing move in this position, which helps clarify the position somewhat. He actually plays e5 using that doubling here. So black cannot take now. After d takes, we just win d7, winning a piece. There's nothing for black there. So Vishy's forced on the retreat. There's only actually one move available to protect d6, which is knight e8. It's the only move really to stay in the game here. Knight e8, and we see e takes d6, and we thought it would just simplify in a quick draw here at move 30. After all, Magnus just needs a draw, and he's the new chess world champion. So we see rook c6, and just to get a draw, we assumed during the live commentary, myself, Alex, and Paul all agreed that we thought Magnus would play rook ed3. So this kind of position, offering the exchange of queens, would be ideal for Magnus just needing a draw. There's never any knight d6 because of c5. We thought his c5 is a big advantage, if nothing else. In this position, just using that pin, winning a piece. Very simple. So given this, it will be very difficult, it seems, for black to do anything else here apart from take the queens off. So that's why we're very surprised a little bit. So, well, no, a lot. So if queen d8, for example, then here again white's doing quite well with. We thought that white's doing just well. It's just going to exchange off pieces. It will be a draw. But what happened instead was actually f4. Now, there's not too many moves here. The queen has to go back to d8. If the queen goes to c5, we've got the forcing move b4, and we're going to support d6, and that's the end of the game. White's winning. So the queen has to go back to d8. She does go back to d8. Rook ed3. And now we just fought massive exchanges, endgame, handshake. And what happened? So if the knight ever takes, we've always got c5. So the knight can't take to sort of keep the tension here because of c5. And that's winning a piece. So what we see is rook c takes. So one pair of rooks come off. Another pair come off because knight takes again, we've got c5. So another pair of rooks come off. Now the queens come off. And we just thought this is going to be a draw anytime soon. This is move 35. It looks fairly drawish. All Magnus needs is a draw. But all of a sudden, it also occurred to us, if this was any other game, why not, we would go for an advantage maybe in any other games. The king looks as though it's quite ideal. This 3-2 pawn majority here, and this king gliding along the dark squares. If it heads for b6, black would be on the passive side. Even if the king got over here, white would have a more aggressive king. But black can always create a passed pawn in counter attack, maybe. So ideally, you just want to just handshake to reduce any risk of not blowing this draw. If all you need is a draw to become world champion, then unnecessary risks are to be avoided, surely. But we see on move 36, king f2, and it looks as though there was no sign of either player offering a draw. King f8, king e3, king e7, king d4, king d7. And here was interesting because this was an opportunity for black, Vishy Anand, to stop the king getting over here by playing knight f5 check. In this position, knight f5 check is probably actually also the engine choice. It just simply stops the king's further travel to the b6 square. So this looks to be entirely equal, but it's not what Vishy wants. Of course, he wants to try and mix something up to try and maybe have a shocking win today. So he's letting this king get to c5. So king d7, king c5. It didn't need to be allowed to get to c5. But we see something interesting now. King c7, knight c3, knight f5, and this knight has some intention that maybe to harass these pawns. Knight e4, knight e3, and it's starting to sharpen up after g3. f5, there's an invitation for the knight to come to d6 now, where it looks as though it's quite dangerous. For example, knight e8 check to win g7. Knight d6 is indeed played. I thought maybe there's some other moves instead which might offer a clear draw opportunity, like knight d2, but let's not get into them. I think there's a lot of moves to go here still, actually. Knight d6 was played, so it looks as though knight e8 check is the key threat to take on g7. Vishy now plays g5, and all of a sudden there's some complexity emerging in this endgame. Just to give you an example here at move 44, if white tries to think, well, I'll create an h-pawn, say white, he didn't do this, does fg, h4, black has f4 here. This is a good resource. If g takes, actually white's ending up losing this position. This would be actually diabolical after knight d6. g5, not to be taking on g5 for h4. That's quite tricky. Magnus actually played knight e8 check, and we just thought it was going to be a perpetual attack, perpetual check on the king with knight f6 and the king going back. But the king now, knight f6 is played, the king actually steps to e7. So there's something else going on now which is very, very interesting. The white king is being lured to try and win this b pawn, and this can be quite dangerous. Magnus, though, he spends a long time around here, and he plays knight g8 check. Now another surprising move. Not obviously Vishy doesn't want to draw, so he doesn't want to go back for a repetition. Thanks very much, Magnus is new world champion. He doesn't want that repetition. His idea is actually king f8, and here Magnus plays a surprising move. Actually, the engines are indicating that knight f6 is the preferred move in this position, but instead Magnus takes on h6. So Vishy has not only sacrificed his h-pawn, he's letting, it seems, the king go to b6. Very, very dangerous stuff. But what he's banking on potentially is his passed pawn potential here. He plays g takes after g takes. He traps the knight as well. He's winning that knight. And white plays the only move now. If king b6, that's losing to lose that knight. If I try clicking in the centre to avoid the predictive moves, white's actually losing this position because of the very, very fast e5. That's the point here. this f pawn is pretty quick, or one of these pawns is going to be too quick for white. So that's a way of white actually losing, and that would have been pretty gutting for Magnus, but he'd seen more than this. He'd seen much more than this. Much better idea. There's also another idea which is very, very interesting to consider though here, of king d4. I just go to the square that's intended, rather king c3, knight e1. It's unnecessarily complicated, but apparently white's okay here. It's just unnecessary complications with knight g4. White would actually nearly be okay, but it's just not needed to get into this. Magnus plays a far more clear-cut continuation in this position. After g takes f4, g takes king g7. Magnus just takes on f5. Knight takes f5. Check. So he's sacrificing a knight because he knows he's going to get his king to b7, and then these pawns are quite dangerous. Black's not going to be able to flip in e5 to get a very fast running f pawn. So we see e takes f5, so high drama all of a sudden in this endgame. King b6, and now knight g2. So this f pawn's getting ready once this pawn's removed, and white's going to be queening the a pawn. That's the most advanced pawn to get queening, or potentially the c pawn. Let's see what happens. King takes, knight takes f4. If the c pawn is used, then knight d5, and the knight will be sacrificing itself on c7. So if c5, knight d5, and black's winning again, it's just wasted time to do that. So white prepares instead. Black's actually completely winning because this f pawn's so quick. White has to get the a pawn running here. It's one of the only moves. Perhaps b4 just about might stay on the board, but no, taking on a6. The knight goes to e6 now. King b6, and the pawn's only 3 steps away, and this pawn is 4 steps away. So we see f4, a6, f3, a7, f2, a1 queen, a8 queen, f1 queen. Interesting position. We didn't expect any of this. This is now move 57. What does white play? Well, white can try and guide his pawns, of course, forward. And even if he loses one, there's potential for perpetual checks in this scenario. If he gets the queens off, it's a draw. Mating mature is non-existent for black. He plays queen d5. And we see queen e1 preventing b4 for a moment, it would seem. Queen d6 facilitating b4. Queen e3 check. And now Magnus plays a move which allows, it seems, the pawn to drop off, king a6. But the point is, after check, king b5, it's forcing knight takes b3, and now white plays queen c7 check. And the idea here is, if ever the king steps onto the 6th rank, then we've got queen b6 check, getting the queens off draw. Thank you very much, new world champion Magnus Carlsen. In the game we see king h6 indeed played immediately, not bothering with any perpetual checks. It's just equal now. We see the queens coming off, and it can only be a draw now. So we have a new era in chess. This is how the game finished, it seems. And we have a new era with Magnus Carlsen now, the new chess world champion. So a very, very interesting day in the history of chess has just been written today. Magnus, when he was a kid, was dreaming, even in interviews recorded, about wanting one day to become world champion, and thus his dream today has come true. So congratulations to Magnus Carlsen, the new chess world champion. And what a fine game with entertaining end to it to finish off this world championship. I hope you enjoyed my coverage on this channel, and look forward to future major tournaments, etc., where we could also use some live commentary, which was quite entertaining as well. I hope you found. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.